What are you hearing on the ground from protesters? You're actively campaigning right now. What a time to be campaigning on these issues in Manhattan. What's the latest?
Sure. Well, on the policy front, like what are we actually going to get out of this moment? These protests are going to keep going, and they should keep going, and until we see leaders actually responding to what people are asking for. A large number of organizations led by Communities United for Police Reform has asked for $1 billion in NYPD budget cuts for the next fiscal year. Now, this is a very time-sensitive, urgent ask and demand because the budget is due on July 1st. So the city council is in the process of negotiating with the mayor. And, first, what's been remarkable to me, Nomi, as somebody who's worked in this space for a long time, when we supported the $1 billion budget cut proposal, and the biggest feedback we've gotten is that it doesn't go far enough, which just really shows you that people have moved an enormous amount. I mean, this would be the biggest NYPD budget reduction in New York history, and for a lot of people, it's not good enough, which I welcome. I welcome that energy, and now we just need council members to listen to their constituents. I've spoken to several elected officials who say they've gotten more emails and phone calls about this issue than any issue in their entire careers.
Wow.
And so we just need to keep that pressure up. So that's one thing that's happening is this demand for defunding the NYPD. There's also sort of a lot of speculation about whether Mayor de Blasio can continue doing his job. He's totally lost control of the police department. He's lost all political support. He shows no interest in fixing the problems that are breaking out right now. So that is another ongoing thread. And I think it bears mentioning, since if you haven't been at the protests yourself, to just lift up that what's been most positive and inspiring for me about the protests is, number one, the number of young Black Lives Matter organizers who are at the front leading these protests. Just some of the most talented young organizers I've ever seen, a new generation of people coming in to leadership, and the fact that the crowds so often are racially diverse and led by young people. I mean, these are all reasons for me to feel optimistic about the direction that we're heading, even though we're in a very difficult week right now.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's pretty extraordinary. We've been interviewing some of these organizers who came of age during, the Freddie Gray uprisings, or, I mean, it's so powerful to see what they're learning on the ground at such a young age. And it's, that's a bright side of this, is that these movements are building, a generation of leaders that have unfortunately had to go through these extraordinary circumstances to develop the skills of the leaders of a generation. And now there's, possibly hundreds, maybe even thousands of them will be rising up across America. So can we talk a little bit about the history of NYPD and how they are compared to, I mean, the police forces are different across the country, but New York it's the most diverse place on the planet, literally. I mean, Queens is the most diverse borough, and Bronx comes in second. So when we talk about things like stop and frisk, which does not exist anymore, I mean, you had these policing tactics which were copied throughout the country, but sort of created or utilized the most in New York, and they were very controversial. So can we talk a little bit about the legacy of the NYPD over the last few years and what has been fought and what still needs to be done?
Absolutely, and historically, you could probably go back much further than this, but in my observations, the defining moment of the modern NYPD was actually when we had a different horrible president in office, and we were protesting that situation, the 2004 Republican National Convention protests. Mm-hmm. So the Republican National Convention in 2004 was held in New York City. 9/11 was used as a political prop, and New Yorkers responded with enormous protests, and the NYPD responded with enormous brutality and flagrant violations of the Constitution. During those protests, there was what was called kettling, where hundreds of protesters at a time would be trapped by barricades on city streets, not allowed to leave even if they wanted to. And then all of them would systematically be arrested, they'd be zip tied, and they'd be charged. And it took literally a decade, maybe longer actually, for the actual case to wind its way through the courts, the civil rights cases. But ultimately, judges ruled overwhelmingly against the NYPD. Millions of dollars of legal awards were given out to people who had been arrested. And so that was where the modern NYPD sort of set the tone, that they are going to break the rules not ask for permission, right? But basically just live with the fact that they're going to rack up hundreds of millions of dollars in jury awards, and that they're not going to listen to the rule of law. We saw that again during Occupy Wall Street. I got to share this anecdote. During Occupy Wall Street, at the end of Occupy in Manhattan, the Zuccotti Park area was cleared out by NYPD. They brought in all kinds of big trucks and hundreds of officers arresting people. We went to court in the middle of the night to get an injunction against what they were doing. And we showed up to Zuccotti Park with it. And the police officer on the scene commanding said, "I don't give a damn what your little piece of paper says," about an order from a judge. Wow. So this is how the NYPD operates. They continue to operate this way during the Eric Garner protests. But what we're seeing now, Nomi, is a different level. I've, for my entire life, seen individual rogue police officers behaving violently. I have seen them disobeying court orders. Mm-hmm. What I have never seen at this scale is NYPD officers en masse, entire units, descending on people with batons, acting violently in concert as if directed to by their leadership. That is a new and scary level of violence and illegality that, New Yorkers are responding to now. I feel like we may not be at 7 days of protesting in the streets had they not behaved so violently day 1 and 2. So that is new, and that is very scary.
It's interesting. I as much as kettling might not be allowed anymore, I was at a protest a few years ago in front of, not far from Trump Tower, but it was around Trump Tower, and they did it to me as a journalist, and it was on camera, and I was talking to the head of the unit saying, "You can't do this legally." And this lawyer, who just happened to be walking home, came up to me and he joined the protest, and he got in their face and basically recited the law on camera. It was amazing. But, it's also exactly what you say in that they just don't care. They don't care that they're violating the law, even when it's on camera, even when an attorney, goes up to their face and cites the law. So I think that's what's really fascinating about this moment is you have a police force that is being documented over and over again, physically abusing peaceful protesters on camera every single day. And it's as if they do not care. I think that's what's really hard for people to comprehend.
Absolutely. And this is where, I know there's a lot of people tuning into this issue in a meaningful way for the first time. And I had this exchange just this morning where people are asking, well, $1 billion, that doesn't sound like it's solving the problem. And so I just want to walk people through for a second why this particular fight is so important to the broader picture that you're painting there. The police officers in New York always get their way politically, right? They get their way in the moment, like we've just been talking about. They get whatever budget increases they want. They go to Albany and they block criminal justice reform legislation. So they consider themselves an omnipotent political force. The idea behind this $1 billion budget cut is, yes, to scale down the size of the NYPD, absolutely. Yes, to make sure that they don't have access to military-grade weaponry and they can spend city taxpayer money on that. But it's also about sending a message, right? The police never lose politically. If we can take $1 billion from their budget and make sure that money is spent on summer youth employment programs, mental health programs, after-school funding, and send a message that as a city, as a statement of values, we care about that more than giving the NYPD the money that they want, it's enormous. And I get that it doesn't go far enough, and I get that it doesn't transform the system, but we need to start with a political signal, right, that our city values its citizens more than it values the NYPD.
Thank you for watching The Nomiki Show. You can support us on YouTube by clicking subscribe, like, and sharing to get those alerts. And patrons, well, they make this show run on time. So thanks to all of you who have joined our community already. If you like our content and want more, from special segments to interviews and merch, you can join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. I'm spending all of my iced coffee money on other people's shows because I think this is the time that we have to support our independent media.